we've just hit midday, so I'm going to make a start. As I said, a few points of housekeeping before I dive into the main content. This session is being recorded, and I'm going to make that available to everyone who's registered for this session, along with a bunch of digital resources, including the slides. So hopefully that will allow you to really concentrate on what we're covering, knowing that it's all going to be coming to you a little bit later today. Hi, Paula. You're very welcome. Thanks for dropping that into the chat. Um, Please, as questions or comments occur to you, drop them into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that as I go through the content. So, this is the latest in a series of sessions all about coaching, demystifying coaching, talking a little bit about how we approach coaching at WorkLifePsych, and enabling you to get answers to really commonly asked questions. Today, we're going to be looking at the topic of how coaching can contribute to our productivity, which is one of the main areas that we work with at WorkLifePsych. So, a little bit about me. If we've not met before, I'm a workplace psychologist. I'm chartered as an occupational and a coaching psychologist, and I'm an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society. I've been doing what I'm doing for nearly 25 years at this point, and I founded my business, Work Life Psych, just over 11 years ago. You can find out a lot more about me via the links on screen if you would like. But I spend, it changes from quarter to quarter, but I probably spend about 75% of my time coaching individuals and have been doing so for at least the last 15 years of my career, if not a little bit more. That's given me an insight into what works and some of the challenges that individuals can face accessing coaching and getting the most from their coaching experience. So I'm on a bit of a drive this year to help people understand what coaching is and what it's not, how they can access it, and how they can extract maximum value from their coaching experience. At WorkLifePsych, coaching is one of the things that we do, but we also provide a range of training courses, and we design and deliver development programs. Everything from graduate development programs up to leadership development and everything in between. And three of the big ticket themes that we look at are well-being at work, productivity at work, and interpersonal effectiveness, helping people attain, maintain, and boost their effectiveness in these areas. And often, as you might imagine, they come together. They're not in neat boxes in the real world, but this is a handy way of describing what it is that we do. And just to notify you about a couple more upcoming events that you may be interested because you're here today, I'm running a masterclass at the end of the month all about the value of values, understanding what our values are and how we can bring them to life. That is a central plank in the work that I do as a coaching psychologist, and I'm going to reference that a little bit later on. People may wonder why are we talking about values when it comes to productivity? I would argue, and the science would support me, that understanding what matters to you enables you to be far, far more productive. And the next in this series, all about coaching, wraps up for the year in December, which is all about life after coaching. Coaching, by its very nature, is a time limited activity. So, how do we make sure that it ends well and that the individual, the coachee, is able to continue with a focus on their development without the support of a coach? So, what I want to cover in this relatively brief session is revisit what we mean by coaching, talk a little bit about what we mean by productivity, because that's a bit of a loaded term. Talk about some of the really common productivity traps, productivity challenges, some of the things that show up in coaching that might not be labeled a productivity problem, but we can trace its roots back from a psychological perspective to something in that space, and then illustrate really clearly what is it that coaching can do when it comes to these traps and challenges. Now, it won't be a complete list. We don't have time to cover all of the various ways that our personality, our psychology, our behavior, our environment can get in the way of us being productive. But I want to share some of the really common ones with you, and hopefully this will illustrate what it is that I'm talking about. What is coaching? Many, many competing definitions of this. What I'm talking to normal people outside, not fellow psychologists. I talk about helping people move from stuck to unstuck. Stuck could be stuck in a pattern of behavior that's no longer working for them, stuck when it comes to figuring out what their options are, stuck in their career, stuck when it comes to maybe conflict or friction in relationships. And unstuck is simply being able to see that there are options, being able to weigh up those options. I'm no longer stuck on the far side of discomfort or fear about the future, but unstuck so they can take committed action in a valued direction. And some of the big ticket items that come up in the coaching work that we do include helping people change behavior to support their well-being, leave unhelpful, unhealthy habits behind, productivity, which we'll talk about today, managing, navigating, forming and maintaining relationships in the workplace, and sometimes the relationships that are impacted by involvement in the workplace. How to make sense of a career path. And that's an evolving topic. And it has been, I would say, for the last 20 years. What is a career and what does career success look like? And then closely related to that, how do we navigate change? Change that is done to us in the workplace, but also the changes that we want to make in our lives. Just some of the different topics that we work with in the coaching space. Now, as coaching psychologists, what sets us apart is that we are accredited and trained psychologists who also have coaching skills. And this is an important distinction because for the rest of this session, I want to illustrate how bringing coaching psychology to life makes all the difference when it comes to the kinds of challenges that surface and might be labeled a productivity challenge. So let me move on to attempt to define what we mean by productivity. I wanted to start with this because it's a bit of a loaded term. And I find that, like many of the words that are bounced around in the workplace, it can take on a life of its own and it can take on meanings that maybe aren't intended. And it can lead to behaviors that are far from healthy and sustainable. Let me start by saying, from our perspective, what it doesn't mean. Being productive does not mean doing everything that comes your way. In the short term, saying yes can feel easy and it can feel like the good thing to do. But if we say yes to everything, we do not have time or energy or focus to do those things at all or even do them well. So it's not about opening up some kind of capacity to take on more necessarily. It's most definitely not navigating life with an empty inbox. For one thing, our inbox is not under our control. Our inbox consists of other people's to-do list. So really, living in the inbox, which is something I'll return to a little bit later on, is one of the kind of cardinal sins of productivity. It's like sticking my head out of the window here and saying, before I look at my priorities for the day, has anyone anywhere in the world got something they'd like me to do instead? But because in the corporate space, in larger organizations, more and more of our communication is being done electronically, it seems like people should pay attention to what's coming into the inbox to guide their decision making and to guide their focus. Being productive is not about setting more and more goals. A point I make regularly in training and development is that goal setting is easy. Goal setting is super easy. Grab a pen and a notebook, write down your goal. We've got some criteria to ensure it's a good quality goal, but goal setting is easy. The work that we need to do to attain the goal, that's the difficult bit. And it's so easy to set goals that actually we feel I might be more productive if I had a few more goals. And before we know, we've overwhelmed ourselves. And maybe without taking the action that's going to get us to the finish line. Productivity is not about squeezing in more to our week, to our month, whatever that might look like. In fact, I want to illustrate today that a lot of the perspective on productivity that I share is about stripping out, removing the unnecessary, removing the low priorities. In fact, coming back to goals, dropping goals that are no longer relevant, no longer achievable, or that have been superseded by something much more important. much more in line with where the individual wants to go. And we're not talking about the kind of efficiency that you would associate with a robot because we're humans. And something that all of us as individuals forget regularly is that me at 10 a.m. on a Monday, well, I'm going to feel like quite a different person to 4 p.m. on a Friday. If I'm doing a 5-day week, my levels of motivation, enthusiasm, energy, and focus will differ. So just because I'm looking at my calendar and saying, well, that is possible to do, that is very different to what it's actually going to feel like to be that professional on those different days of the week. And the one thing machines don't have that we do is an inner world and an emotional life. And that really plays a large part in our productivity. So it's not just adapting our way of working, and it's not just adopting a third party system, although systems can be really useful. When we look at this through the lens of coaching psychology, it's about understanding this is an individual with a personality, with drives, with motivations, with values, who is living in a context, who is living in a system that they need to navigate in a flexible and sustainable way. In other words, what I do to get through today, maybe to get through the week, might work for that week, but it may not set me up for success or health if I replicate that week every week for the rest of the year. So, part of discussing productivity in a coaching context is not just finding how you're surviving, but how you might like to live at work and what is going to help you navigate existing and anticipated challenges in a sustainable way. One of the things I'll share with everyone in the follow-up resources is a link to our Sustainable Leadership Hub, including a white paper that you can download for free that sets out this argument in much more detail and fluency than I'm doing right now, but making the case for a sustainable approach to work and not just one of getting through the day, getting through the week, spending the weekend simply recovering. Instead, when I'm asked by clients, I talk about productivity as simply doing the right thing in the right way at the right time. This means we need to think, we need to make decisions, we need to evaluate. We're not working on a production line where the next thing is decided for us. Although if we live in our inbox, that's what it feels like. The next email, or the next instant message, or the next phone call, or whatever it might be. Doing the right thing means we need to choose from a very large list of possible things we could do. Doing it in the right way speaks to quality. What does good look like for this task in this context I'm in? And at the right time, which speaks to prioritization, which is an absolute necessity if we're going to navigate an endless workload, because work never ends until we leave the workforce. So we always have to make these decisions, including when we've done enough for the day, when we've done enough for the week, because there'll always be more for us to do. So if we take these three important elements of being productive, prioritizing work in a way that works, emphasizing the appropriate level of quality. We're not looking for perfection because that's one of the traps I'm going to talk about later. And timing things in a way that represents an appreciation for, yes, goals and deadlines, but also pressure and stress, and also relationships, because it's very easy for us to forget that we're interdependent with other people. So what works for me may not work for those people who are waiting for my outputs or whose outputs I'm using to create my outputs, whatever it is that I'm doing at work. And in order to do these things well, we need to juggle at least three limited resources: time, attention, and energy. This is often where I start if I'm training a group in a productivity approach, to remind them that no matter who you are and how senior you are, or even how mega successful you are, you've got a limited amount of time each day and each week. And inevitably, someone will put their hand up and say, but what about pulling an all-nighter? I would frame that as you're simply borrowing time from the next day because you're a human and you're going to have to pay that time back. You will not be as effective the next day. So we've got limited time and we need to budget that. We've got limited mental capacity, mental focus or attention that we can bring. And like I said, you at 10 a.m. on a Monday and you at 4 p.m. on a Friday, you will feel different from that perspective. And different work that we do requires different amounts of attention. So I'll ask groups that I'm working with to think about the activities that are on their to-do list that might take a lot of time but not much attention, and the things that might take very little time but an incredible amount of attention or focus. And as I said, unlike robots and machines, our energy depletes over time, and we need to rest and recover and recuperate from our exertions. And some of our work will require a lot of our energy. I was in Dublin yesterday running a workshop. It was a half-day workshop, had lunch, and then poof, sudden slump because that, while really engaging and good fun for me and really interesting, took a lot more energy than simply sitting at a desk and running a series of coaching sessions. So part of being productive is being realistic about your resources and being intentional about how you're going to invest them in a given period of time. And it's not enough just to think about today or even the week. As I'll illustrate in a moment, just thinking Monday to Friday is a trap that can really trip us up. So let me talk about some of these traps, some of these ways of working that represent being stuck. Like I said at the start, feeling stuck. It's the only way I can think of navigating this, or it's always how I've done it, or that's how I was taught to do it. And some of the challenges that manifest commonly in the contemporary workspace. But maybe take a moment before I start telling you, think about the challenges that you face. And if you're happy to, please drop them into the webinar chat. Let us know what are the kinds of things that you feel make working life more difficult, that get in the way of you focusing on what matters, or that leave you feeling a little less than fulfilled at the end of a working day or a working week. So I've got two categories of these that I'd like to illustrate. There's ones that I'll refer to as tactical errors. These are small things that are relatively easy to right once someone knows about them, once someone realizes that it doesn't work for them. And then there's the things that are a little bit more deeply rooted that might take more work to undo, to unlearn, and to replace with more effective ways of working. I've mentioned the first one already because I come across it all the time. Living in the email inbox, taking my cue from the next email that appears. My to-do list is in my inbox. So if I need to know what to do, I need to look at my inbox. Suddenly there's new emails and now I've got more things to do. You can see that it's a lot like trying to empty a lake with a teaspoon or to stop a stream with one finger. It's a thankless task, and it's one where it gets in the way of our focus. It interrupts us. It reminds us of things that we haven't done yet. All the things that are the opposite of focusing on one thing at a time. It's really easy to overcommit when we've got multiple stakeholders. It's really easy to overcommit when everything we're being asked to do sounds interesting or challenging. It's really easy to overcommit if we're a bit of a people pleaser. And sometimes these things come together. And while it's not an evidence-based assertion, in my experience in the workplace, many of the people who are overcommitting are high performers, and they're the kinds of people who have done really well and end up with more work, which is deeply unfair. But overcommitment can lead to people burning the midnight oil, working extra hours under intense pressure, and it may mean that they find it difficult to push back, to say no, or to ask for help. If we rely on our memory for what I should be doing next or what needs doing tomorrow, we're really putting a needless pressure on ourselves because one of the greatest advancements in human civilization is the written word. And yet people regularly forget to write things down, make a note. So when you're taxing your memory, you are using, let's say, needless cognitive horsepower when you could, in fact, just reference a written list of things for today or just for this morning that you want to get through, allowing you to focus primarily on the task at hand. If we don't prioritize, then whatever gets our attention next is what will be done. Whoever makes the most noise is the person we'll work for. Not necessarily what's of most value, of most importance, or of most urgency. This is a very tactical skill that once people learn how to prioritize effectively, it can bring clarity to an overwhelming task list and allows them to verbalize how they are prioritizing to other people. And it works really well when an entire team prioritizes in the same way. It requires flexibility, it requires communication, but it's a lot easier to look at a list of 3 things to be done rather than 33 things because there are no coherent list of priorities. This might sound like an argument over terminology, but mixing up tasks and projects leads to overwhelm really quite quickly. I put it, and I'm not the only practitioner that does, a task is something that you do and it's done. Making a phone call, writing an email, proofing a document. A project is when you've got multiple tasks. The illustrative example I always use is sorting out your summer holiday. That's something nice to look forward to, right? But at the same time, if sort out summer holiday was on your to-do list, every time you looked at it, you'd feel a little bit overwhelmed because where do I start? Because that's a project. It's not a task, and it shouldn't be on a task list. What should be on the task list is the next actionable task from the project, sort out my summer holidays. And that's things like book the time off, choose a destination, book the flights, find a hotel, set up a WhatsApp group, whatever it is that you want to do. And so it is with work. A lot of the time, this stuff that stresses people out is something that's on their list where they don't know where to start, or it just feels like too much because they haven't sliced it into actionable tasks. A very simple idea, but one that makes a huge difference when you're thinking about considering your workload. I mentioned the Monday to Friday focus just a few moments ago. It's very easy for us to live Monday to Friday when that's our working week. But what tends to happen is that the plan is for Monday to Friday. And what gets neglected is the following Monday. And even though it is as inevitable as the sun rising and setting, the following Monday comes around and seems like panic stations, like an absolute betrayal of our plans. Here's Monday. So what I try and encourage my coachees to do is look at a month at a time as well as a week at a time. Because Monday is not the time to realize one of your colleagues on leave this week and you're covering for them. Monday is not the time to realize you've set yourself up for some deadlines on that day in addition to what you didn't finish last week, and so on. So it can be nice to work towards a Friday. That can feel good, but it's as useful to consider the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, at least to think about your responsibilities, your tasks, how you want to invest your time, attention, and energy, and so on. And finally, as I briefly mentioned earlier, we might have a way of working that works for us, but it doesn't work for those around us. Procrastination is a great example. People who say, I love working right up to a deadline. I do my best work in the final hours before the deadline. That's all very well. They probably haven't tested an alternative and they're buying into that story. But this also ruins their reputation with those around them. They're viewed as unreliable. They're viewed as potentially a bit of a drama queen, someone who is making more of a fuss of things than they need to, all because other people want to see progress on a Monday to Friday and not just before the close of business on Friday. And this is just one way forgetting that we're part of a system can make life difficult for us. I refer to these as tactical errors because they're reasonably straightforward to address and make a change. So it's some of the other things where coaching psychology and coaching methods make a really big difference. I'd like to cover those now. So there's a big theme in productivity coaching of people feeling overwhelmed. And in part, this could be a to-do list. In part, it could be having too many deliverables. In part, though, it's how we think about the work and everything from our self-concept, our identity, our self-talk, the amount of I need to, I should, I ought to, the amount of it all sits with me and I don't want to bother other people. And before we know it, wanting to please others and not bother others. And well, now I've got too much to be done. And if I think I need to do everything, if I believe I'm the only one who can do this well, then we're quickly going to be overwhelmed and fall back on ways of coping with this that are not sustainable. We will inevitably be impacted at an emotional level by this. Often it's obvious to those around us, and it doesn't contribute well to a collaborative and a calm working environment. And so addressing this is less about do a better task list and much more about what are you saying to yourself about this situation? What do you believe of the stories you're telling yourself about yourself? That self concept piece. And what lessons about the world of work have you internalized over the years that you could maybe set aside because they're no longer helpful for you? This is really important as people step into more senior positions where a tactic, a way of working that has worked for them previously, it's no longer working. And they need to find a new way of figuring out what really matters, what really sits with them, and learn how to delegate a little bit better or learn how to press pause on things. An evergreen topic in coaching is procrastination. And it doesn't just manifest in I'm not getting important things done at work. Procrastination is about avoiding anticipated or actual psychological discomfort. And that could be everything from this task is boring, I shouldn't have to do this task, a little bit of rebellion and pushback, through to I'm afraid of what will happen when I complete this task. It's a topic that's come up on the podcast recently about why we don't look out for ourselves from a well-being perspective, why we don't change our behavior now to get an outcome for our well-being in the future. And that's the reason why, because the outcome is in the future. And it feels good to do this thing now, whether it's cake or smoking or alcohol. We can procrastinate making a positive change because we're focused on how uncomfortable it will be to experience that, and we'll focus on the loss and the discomfort. Or we could procrastinate about doing something really important, like making an appointment with a medical practitioner to address our symptoms, because all we're focused on is avoiding the discomfort of that conversation. We've lost sight of the goal, which is to get an insight into what's going on with my body. Procrastination is a difficult one to unpick for that reason. And if it were solved by just make a start or just do more, then no one would procrastinate. It can cause real problems in relationships. It can cause real problems from a well-being perspective, and because it can manifest as someone who's super productive, ironically, because they're getting things done at the last minute. They're getting things over the line. They're pulling an all-nighter to finish stuff. Sometimes they can be viewed as a bit of a hero, which can underline that, hey, this works for me. So one of the necessary steps here is to take a step back and say, can you imagine doing this for the next 10 years and living like this, procrastinating about all of these important things and then having to force yourself painfully to do them rather than learning how to cope and persist through the discomfort. I do a lot of graduate development work and early career development work. And something that manifests early days is something I would label unsustainable striving. It is great if someone has career ambition, but when that ambition becomes relentless, becomes inflexible, then people will strive for the next thing without thinking why I want to do that. And they will think, again, short term. So I'm sacrificing my personal life now. I'm doing these 80-hour weeks now, but that's just to get to this next level. Then I'll make a change. And then I'm sitting down with them mid-career and they've been doing it for 20 years and they forget why they did it in the first place. They just know that it's taken a toll on their well-being and their relationships inside and outside of work. So this is pushing ourselves to reach something without really thinking why we started or just how important it is in the bigger piece of our lives, the non-work domain of our lives. Again, another evergreen topic that is really well addressed by coaching psychology is perfectionism. There are so many pluses for perfectionists in the workplace. They are rewarded for their high standards. They're rewarded for getting things just so. They are told, good job. But actually, what's going on underneath the surface is a lot of fast pedaling, a lot of panic, a lot of inflexibility, and over time, an erosion of good quality relationships and cooperation and collaboration in the workplace. And it's also associated with, unfortunately, procrastination. Imagine the self-talk. I want this document to be perfect. And I don't think the day ahead of me is going to lend itself to that. So I'm going to start tomorrow because tomorrow will be an ideal day to make this document perfect. Now, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny for very long when you say it like that. But when our self-talk sounds like that, it's easy to buy into it. And we find ourselves not knowing what is good enough. And if we could argue that perfection is impossible, as in what is perfect for any of the work that we do, what we're missing here is an understanding of standards, what's expected, what is good, what is great, what could be better. All of those are more useful than an emphasis on perfection. And even the attainment of great feedback, the attainment of goals, does not fill someone with perfectionistic tendencies with joy. It's kind of a hollow victory, and all they want to do is the next thing, which could be even more perfect than the last. Back in the day, way back in the day when I was doing my doctoral research, I was looking at the topic of work-life balance. And at that time, a lot of people were researching how employees could learn how to disconnect from work. That's become more and more of a challenge as technology has permeated our work more and more, and it's permeated society. And the devices that we use for work are also the devices we use for entertainment and so on. And so it can be that someone finds it's more and more difficult to not think about work or to not do work. This can manifest in lots of different ways. Constantly checking messages while sitting on the sofa in the evening, um, thinking about work and therefore not being psychologically present with the people closest to them in their lives, or anticipatory anxiety, what many people know as the Sunday scaries, where just before the working week starts, the anxiety about what needs to be done, what will be difficult to do, the challenging conversations, that sort of takes away from the weekend and any sense of joy that we might get from our downtime. So again, if this were solved by just put your laptop away, then no one would experience this. This is much better handled at the psychological level. Again, what are you saying to yourself about this? How are you drifting from your personal values? How can you learn the thinking skills to step back from these thoughts and see them for what they are and how to cope effectively, but also to ensure that you're leveraging your focus so that when you are at work, you're focusing on those priorities. And your lack of focus during the working week doesn't mean you have to use your weekend to mop up what is undone. I found a kind of a worrying trend in a lot of knowledge professionals who have a shorthand for the weekend, which is just, well, what doesn't get done Monday to Friday, I'll do at the weekend. So it's no longer a sort of sacred space for disconnecting, but rather all the things that I couldn't get done, I'll address then. And that is ultimately unsustainable. And of course, when people are not able to get assistance, help, support, or to delegate work, that quickly leads to overwhelm. And again, being told you need to delegate doesn't really help someone in this position. It's often associated with a rigid view of themselves. I must be able to do all of this. I should be able to be independent. I shouldn't need anyone to help me with my workload. Or no one around me is going to be good enough to do this. So it could be rooted in discomfort about giving up work. It could be about perfection and very high standards. It could be about not wanting to be seen as someone who's not on their A game all the time. Whatever the reason, it's useful to explore it from that fundamental psychological level rather than just being told to do it more. Now, you probably have seen, and in thinking about your own challenges, that these rarely appear in neat boxes. It can be that an overwhelming self-critical voice inside can lead people to perfectionism, to working incredibly long hours, to not delegate, and to quickly get overwhelmed. It's less about badging the issue than it is about helping someone see the unworkability of their approach, the lack of sustainability in their approach, and to help them accept that there could be another way to deal with the challenges that they're facing. And this is really where coaching can make such a big, big difference. Often, what we've just described, that might be a badge of convenience for someone. They might find it useful to talk about their perfectionism. They might find it useful to say, I need to delegate more. But what we're actually looking at are the underlying ways they're thinking about themselves, they're talking to themselves, how they've maybe drifted from what really matters to them, how they're maybe just going through the motions and not being intentional with their decision making. So fundamentally, the coaching relationship is about providing a healthy mix of support and accountability. Support in that I'm here to help. Accountability is that when you say you're going to do something, I'm going to ask you whether you did it or not. We won't politely push it to one side and pretend it doesn't exist. Accountability means, it's useful for me to follow through because I've made this commitment to somebody else. But I also bring objectivity. I'm not part of the system in which you work. I'm not dependent on your outputs. I'm not your manager. I'm not your friend. I can bring objectivity to this and ask the kinds of questions that those closest to you may not have thought of asking. And of course, coaching psychologists will bring a level of expertise that may not be in their professional network or in their friend group or in their family, where it can be really difficult to share expertise or insights without that sounding difficult and loaded. So we're bringing the expertise of coaching skills, but also a really good and thorough understanding about how people think and how they feel, their emotional lives, and how they can achieve behavior change. So one of the ways that we do this that I reference a lot is about helping them build the skills that contribute towards their psychological flexibility. This is the outcome. We want to have higher psychological flexibility, and we do this through building a set of skills that have wins across the board. They enable us to be more goal oriented. They contribute positively to our well being and our job satisfaction. So, this is a skill set I use a lot in coaching and on development programs. First of all, people learn to reconnect with what's important to them. That can really separate the important from the unimportant. And it can help them identify with this is the kind of person I want to be, which is a useful touchstone when making decisions. It also helps people focus on the here and now and engage less in the mental time travel of returning to past mistakes or drifting to an anxious future that hasn't even happened yet. They learn how to see themselves flexibly, not as a collection of rules or roles to live up to, but someone who's made up of millions of data points, positive and less positive and neutral and everything else. They learn how to see thoughts about themselves as just thoughts, and they can overcome beliefs they're holding about themselves and the world much more flexibly and not let them get between them and taking action. And the other big barrier to a lot of this stuff that prevents us from being productive is this psychological discomfort, all the thoughts and feelings that we do not want to experience. So instead of navigating around that or attempting to minimize that discomfort, we learn how to deal with it by accepting it. It's part of the package. If I am a manager, I'm going to have some difficult conversations. If I want to have an enjoyable weekend, I'm going to have to dig deep and finish this by the end of the week. If I want to attend that really interesting conference, I'm going to have to do a lot of boring paperwork in order to get sign off. There's always something before the win. Accepting it and persisting through it means we get to the other side and we get the win. And that enables us, in summary, to just do more of the stuff that matters. Brings clarity, it brings energy, it brings goal attainment to the fore. We're less caught up with thinking about thinking and worries and thinking about worries, and more focused on doing the stuff that matters and being really sensitive to the context we're actually in so that we do what works in the here and now. So that helps us prioritize. That helps us bring our values to the fore when we're making decisions on what could I do next? What would be valuable? What would be impactful? What would be fun? Rather than what's in my inbox? What's next on my list? It helps people to cope in sustainable ways with the pressure that comes their way. Even the most planned and productive person is going to encounter difficulties. So, learning how to cope with them in ways that will contribute to their well being rather than erode their well being over time. And this is really important, helping us move away from short term coping just to feel better the evening of through to coping in ways that boost our well-being, boost our self-awareness, boost our social connection so that we can get out the other side being an even better person than we were when we went in. A very basic point, but seeing the value in being proactive about our work, not waiting to be a passive recipient, but reaching out to learn, to plan, to organize. Not seeing this as a boring tool, but rather something that gives us a sense of control in a very uncontrollable environment, that gives us a sense of ownership and allows us to do things like visually represent our priorities, visually represent our habits and behavior, and set ourselves up for success over the longer term, thinking about quarters and months and not just days and weeks. And as I mentioned, learning how to persist through things that we find uncomfortable. Those around us might thrive on these things. There are so many flavors of psychological discomfort, but there are things that as individuals we find particularly difficult. And yet I say in virtually every training course, think about what you're most proud of. Think about your big achievements. Now think about the discomfort you persisted through to achieve that. We're all capable of persisting through various forms of discomfort. It's just about making that connection between the why, our values, and the goal, and the kind of person that we want to be. And this isn't about just doing the huge, impactful, big, and meaningful things. People will try and avoid uncomfortable, embarrassing, boring conversations. They will minimize exposure to situations where they don't feel supremely confident. They will avoid asking questions that would bring them clarity to avoid looking silly. But that's the kind of discomfort that if we keep avoiding it, we're making our lives more and more difficult. So, just skimming the surface there of the kinds of problems that we encounter, the kinds of challenges, and how an appreciation of coaching psychology and bringing an evidence-based approach, because psychological flexibility and the methods that we use to grow that collectively are called acceptance and commitment coaching, an extremely evidence-based coaching method, which means we can demonstrate not only that it works, but how it works and for whom it works. That's what being an evidence-based practitioner means. So the way we help our clients and organizations is productivity focused coaching. Might not be called that in the moment, but it's there to help them overcome these kinds of things. Or for a group, training in some of these methods, training in some of these thinking skills. And of course, we have specific psychological flexibility training courses. I'll include a link to our most recent one that's starting at the end of this month for those of you who have registered for today's session. And of course, when it comes to productivity with a big P, we can help organizations take a step back and think about how they want to approach this and how they can include it in everything from how they select people, how they develop people, and the key skills that they want their managers to have, and the attitudes they want them to bring to the fore when managing the workloads and the prioritization of the people that work for them. So I'm going to share everything I've covered today, including the recording of this session and some other resources that support the key messages here. Please check out the YouTube channel at worklifepsych.tv, where all of our other recordings sit, as well as some short coaching related videos. You'll be getting an email from me directly, so feel free to respond to that email with your questions, your comments. And if you would like to experience and know more about what coaching is for an individual, you can make a free, no commitment appointment for a chemistry session. And that's where we find out more about what you want to achieve with coaching, and you find out a lot more about us and our methods. And you can do that by visiting worklifepsych.com/appointments. Really happy to take any questions. I know we've hit the buffer on time, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them now. Or any comments. Productivity is something that people often have some very firm views on, and often that kind of rule-based, there's only one way to write a to-do list, there's only one way to prioritize. That gets in the way. But if there's something I've said that you've got another perspective on, I'd love to hear it. Drop it into the chat or anything I can clarify. Please drop it into the chat. Otherwise, I will say a big thank you to everyone who joined me today. I hope you found it useful. I hope it prompted some thoughts on your own productivity. And by all means, get in touch if any of this resonated with you and you think we could help through the provision of coaching or training for you and your team. In the absence of anything appearing in the chat, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you for joining me and have a great and productive rest of your day. Bye bye for now.